Sue.
Hello there.
All right. Everyone, hello everyone. My name is Richard, and Kim, what salon number is this?
This will be 21.
21? Okay.
We're old enough to do all kinds of things.
Wow. My mind is reeling.
I want to thank everyone. Michael, did you get the password?
Yes.
Okay. I want to thank everyone. I think we're expecting a couple more people. We have a split with the snack bar and the anyway. This is Sue. Sue is going to start off our 22nd salon. Sue is going to talk about her 1983 run, 84 run for president, which is an interesting endeavor. And where's Kate?
Right behind you.
Kate, maybe you can introduce this just for a sec.
Sure.
Okay, so this is Kate. Oh, good. Water.
Thank you.
Thank you, Michael.
That's good.
I'm going to let Kate of Easy TV introduce this because you're intrinsically involved in this project.
Yes.
And so you can speak to it at length for at least 30 seconds.
Yeah, 30 seconds.
Perfect. And then we're just going to let Sue jump in and tell us all about it. And if you have any Gore Vidal anecdotes, don't let us know.
Don't let you off. Okay.
Don't hold back.
First off, Sue and I want to thank so much both Kim and Richard and the Los Angeles Visionaries Association for hosting this today. It's really lovely. What a wonderful place to have it, so thank you. Well, over 25 years ago, Sue went and realized, okay, you'll tell that. Okay, so 3 years ago, Sue approached me, and it was the 25th reunion, or 25th anniversary of her run for president. And we decided that what we really wanted to do is to create an event and kind of a rally celebrating this momentous occasion. And with that, we got together political thinkers and performance artists who worked with her and did a whole event kind of revisiting what this was. And out of that, there was the connection going, and I was asked to go through all of her videotapes that he taped over those years and create a short piece. And from that, we decided, and Sue had started a book. Actually, she and her political advisor had both started books. And the idea was let's finish it. Let's tell this story. And through that, Sue realized that she could weave the two stories together. I came in as editor, and it's been an incredible journey. It's an incredible book. There are insights that are amazing. It's an absolutely unique story. And because of this story, I then decided to start a brand new company called Hyphen Media, which is looking at publishing and creating projects with voices that are absolutely unique, that have stories that just aren't told out in the general media. And with that, I'm very proud to announce our first publication is Susanna Dakin's An Artist for President.
Yay!
Stand up, I wonder. I don't know.
Stand up.
I did.
All right.
Stand up.
I'll lean on the chair.
That's perfect.
Anyway, this book would have been sort of a ongoing polemic that would have bored everybody to death, and I think Kate has helped turn it into a real book that people enjoy reading, so I hope you all do. Anyway, I started out as a sculptor in, materials like clay and wood and stone and metal and so on, kind of an ivory tower artist. And I, by the end of the 70s, I was really feeling frustrated that somehow or other, I looked on sculpture as three-dimensional philosophy, but then I began to realize that people just don't look at it that way. And I wanted somehow a sense of more engagement with what people are thinking and so on. Quiet. Okay. Can you find that and turn it off? So, and also I was distressed that, you know, sculpture as kind of a commodity, somebody buys it, and if enough people buy it, that's your sign of success. And you never have a sense of engagement with the people who, you don't know whether they got from it some of what you were hoping to give through it, and so on. And then in 1980, I started doing performance art. The process, how I got there, is described in the book, and went to a performance festival called Public Spirit. And at that festival, there was this guy, Rivo Pusemp was his name, who was a performance artist, or multi-talented artist, who had taken on as an artwork becoming mayor of a small village in upstate New York. His purpose, as he described it, was Michelangelesque. Michelangelo is well known for having said that what sculpture is, this isn't an exact quote, but approximately, sculpture is removing what is unnecessary. And this little village of Rosedale, New York, had sewage contaminating the water lines. And the political powers that be had not been able to do anything about it. You know, the usual sort of mixture of corruption and so on and so forth, and not the right talents. So he thought, as an artist, he should be able to remove the unnecessity of sewage in the water system. And he achieved that with a friend who was elected to the city council, town council, or whatever it was. And by achieving that, they got the sort of incredulous loyalty of all the villagers. This was a 400-year-old village that everybody had this enormous desire to preserve forever and so on. But he then proposed that what you really need to do is remove my job and remove the administrative structure of the village, because that's what's in the way of solving problems. And they did it. So I thought, it occurred to me just briefly, gee, maybe we should apply that to national politics. But I completely forgot about it, even though there was the idea. But anyway, so in 1982, one morning I walked into my studio, and I had just been listening to the radio, and Reagan was on with something that was just
oh joy,
curdling my insides. And I walked into the studio and looked around. Something felt odd, and I looked up to my right, which was big blank north wall of the studio, and high up on this wall was this enormous banner strung across the wall. And it looked completely real to me. And I stared at it. It said, "An artist for president." And I really thought someone had come in and pinned it up. But after a little while, I began to realize it sort of dissolved and disappeared. But so it was my little visionary, whatever, you know, the artist's eye. But I thought, oh my gosh, what can that mean? And so on. Anyway, I tried to, for about 6 months, I tried to find other potential candidates. And anyway, so in the months following my vision of that banner, I struggled mightily with its challenge. I never wanted to be the candidate myself. It did not seem possible for an unknown artist and political naive like me to practice politics as art discipline, as study, as spiritual practice, not seeking the office while appearing to, without drowning in a bath of ridicule. I spent much of the next 6 months trying to enlist one or another better-known artist as the protagonist in this little drama. Alan Capro was a seriously presidential-looking elder statesman in the performance art world. He had been a pioneer in establishing the concepts and theory of performance and installation art. His response to my asking if he would be the figurehead artist candidate was a kind and serious refusal. He said I should do it myself because only I could really know what I wanted to achieve. I turned to Betty Saar, whom I'd first met through the sculptor Julie MacDonald. Saar created assemblages, so I don't need to read all of this, but she turned me down as well. The third artist I asked was John Baldessari. I'd known him slightly when we were both graduate students in the late 50s at the Los Angeles County Art Institute, earlier and later known as Otis Art Institute. He is probably taller than Abe Lincoln and looked very presidential to me. He seemed amused by the idea but would not consider becoming the candidate. He too encouraged me to do it myself because only I could know what I intended. Hammocksville. There were others I asked, I've now forgotten whom. All refused, some laughed, some were offended. Most were just too busy with their own work. Many felt in any case that tolerance for artists was so fragile in our United States that such a campaign could only set us up for more ridicule. Artists and political activists alike mostly claimed that few people would understand what the campaign was really about. That instruction I kept getting over and over and over became really iconic for me because I found over time that the people who really got it like that were people with no arts background, no political professionalism. However, I felt passionately that national ideas and prejudices about the interrelationships of politics, art, and spirituality had to be addressed by and for everyone. Ordinary folks needed to know that we all have an effect upon political process for good or ill, whether we acknowledge it or not. And that it's more likely to be for ill if we don't take responsibility for it. I wanted the campaign to stimulate conversations and questions among all the folks who'd opted out of the electoral madness. Start a buzz, goose all of us, including whoever actually would become president, toward recognizing everyone's ongoing creativity in daily life and thought and politics, and the vital importance of the arts as survival training in everyone's education. The arts as survival skills is important throughout the book. When all attempts failed to convince any of my preferred candidates to serve as the figurehead for the campaign, I thought of registering the abstraction "an artist" as the candidate. However, friends insisted there would have to be a live candidate in order for there to be any real chance for public engagement with the ideas that drove me. I felt nobody could be less suited for the task than this stage fright-prone, conflict-phobic wallflower, and I was sure my sense of humor lacked the speed and agility required for politics. Nevertheless, it seemed I had no choice. Something was calling me out. In the early 80s, the United States was consuming more than 5 times its share of the world's non-renewable resources and producing an even greater share of the world's pollution, while our president congratulated our voracious consumer society on its greatness. Ideas of frugality and responsible wealth stewardship wandered off and got lost. The wealthy grew wealthier alongside a startling increase in homelessness. Care for less fortunates was parked in the dark with other useless ideas like art education and environmental conservation, while a planet rendered unlivable by nuclear Armageddon haunted our dreams. And I think I will go on to the next section. Anyway, after I did the first launch event, which was on the vernal equinox in 1983, various people started recommending that I get some real political advice. So the first was from a lawyer friend, maybe somebody knows, Joe, old brain, Joe Wyatt. He recommended that I go see a political advisor, political consultant who had worked actually with Ted Kennedy when he was considering a presidential run. I went to see her, and she tried her best to advise me to go for a more realistic office. And I could really understand what she was talking about, because we do need women in those positions. But anyway, then Barbara Smith, who's a pretty well-known performance artist in LA, pointed me toward an opposite kind of political consultant. Did I know Lowell Darling? No. She said he was a performance artist who had campaigned for governor of California against Jerry Brown in 1978. Lowell says that he voted for Brown and Brown voted for him. Lowell's performances were known in the art world, but mostly unknown to me. The only work of his I'd heard of was his acupuncturing the state of California to bring rain and fiscal responsibility back to our drought-ridden Prop 13 state. Anyway, Lowell had written a book about his 1978 gubernatorial campaign. If I'd read it before approaching him, I would have been mightily entertained. Between the funny lines, it contained bits of serious discussion revealing we were of like mind politically. But I might also have understood straight off that successful collaboration between us might require major brain surgery. However, the first evening we met, Lowell snared me. He quoted Picasso as saying, "Art is not the truth, it is the lie that comes closest to the truth." And I just loved it, because it sort of reveals so many levels about truth and lies and so on. Anyway, as it happened, after his effort, Lowell had considered the idea of running for president against Reagan in 1980. He generated a batch of one-liners for the purpose, but had abandoned the project because of the difficulty of raising money. I briefly considered making him the candidate. However, as we talked, I saw this would lead the campaign into something far different from the project pulling my strings. At least he seemed pleased at the thought that some of his best lines might be used after all, and I felt I needed someone like him to push me off my hobby horses and make folks laugh. Anyway, I'm going to... Okay, I see the art of politics as the offspring of the art of philosophy. Philosophy has the impossible job of describing all this so it makes sense. Philo means love, Sophie means wisdom. We need more philosophers in the public arena, not fewer. We especially need philosophers who know they don't know the answers, just love wise questions, and know answers are always only provisional. Lowell said philosophers never get far in US politics. Nobody listens. This was a refrain repeated many times by many people. But aren't we Americans, underneath our ignorance and inhibitions, all philosophers at heart? My experience of ordinary Americans is that we say a lot at the dinner table, but we hesitate to contribute our most thoughtful ruminations to the mix. Lowell and I were to discover how vastly different a take we each had on what it means to be a philosopher, or a woman, or an artist. As I see it now, Lowell shared the fond dream that women might really turn out to be better than men if we were in control. As for me, well, I doubt that. Because we women still meet more resistance than men in our struggle to assume our place at the table, sometimes this can give us a weird sort of advantage. We see more from the back of the room. Slaves and servants always know more about their masters than masters know about their slaves and servants. However, when tables are turned, isn't it all too human to do unto others as we have been done to, rather than as we would have them do unto us? This harsher doing unto is what has been modeled for centuries. It can turn women into equals with men as abusers of power. I'm as wary of a woman touting womanhood as her most compelling qualification for office as I would be of a man who considers manhood to be his main qualification. And of course, we had this major disagreement about what it could mean that everyone might be an artist. He kind of resented the suggestion. Lowell joined the campaign anyway. As self-appointed campaign historian, he would take notes. At the end, he would submit his account of what we had done together. Well, there's lots of other stuff in here, but I'm going to jump.
Sue, I'm wondering, the jacket, the photo on the jacket is you at the start of your campaign.
Right. That scene is in the prologue, and then it's detailed in one of the chapters.
Maybe you could just tell us about that. That's in Venice, right?
In Venice, on Venice Beach. It was, Lowell really felt, I had done this very low-key, what do you call it, performance press conference to start the thing off, but I didn't invite any press. And give us a date, approximately. What?
Give us a date.
That was, that first one was March 21st, 1983.
Equinox 1983, right.
Right. And so then Lowell came on in April, and he said, we really need a big press event. So we stewed around, and I at some point said, you know, I'm really afraid of the surf. I don't know how it came up. And whether he caught onto that or was somewhere else, the idea was that I would come out of the sea. And I felt really deeply that one of the things about running for president is you really have to face your fears before. So I said, okay. And Barbara Smith and a friend of hers, Karen Cohen, and I went out long before anybody turned up and floated out way beyond the surf, and then came in. I mean, it's all described. I really was terrified. And coming back, and even though the surf was not very strong.
Were you swimming?
Swimming, yeah. We went quite far out to be invisible, and then emerged. And the event was a real success. I think there were something like 7 TV cameras and uncounted numbers of print press people and radio people and cousins and and all sorts of people. And that the news release of that, or the photographs of that event, reached national television and went on and on. That was the real kickoff, although it was on the summer solstice. It was 3 months into the campaign. But okay.
And then so from there you had a much more aggressive campaign than you had before.
It went through back and forth between quite aggressive and me hiding.
This is just fascinating to hear this as the candidate hiding. So did that work?
I was terrified, absolutely terrified. And out on the road, we went on this 5-week whistle stop tour, which provides the kind of spine of the book. And well, I would say even over the whole year, I never really got over my stage fright. Every single meeting, whether it was I was so relieved when only 2 or 3 people would turn up. But maybe 25 or 50 people, it would terrify me. And there's one event that I'm not going to read, but that I think is worth reading in here that happens in Houston, where I blanked out and gave the best speech of my life and have no idea what I said. And apparently went on for about 45 minutes.
To about 300 people.
It was, the hall supposedly had a capacity of 700, and it had standing room only. So, and they stood up at the end and gave me this standing ovation. And I was just, what the heck? But then the most bizarre thing happened. It felt as if my body itself was just enlarging. Not distorting in any way, but just enlarging, so that I was the largest, most powerful person in the world. I was just absolutely, again, frightened by this, because it suddenly made me feel I understood the urge to be a dictator.
An artist for dictator.
I mean, it was really scary. Anyway, shall I go on reading anymore, or just do questions? Or
let's just do questions. I think what was the best stop on your whistle tour, your 5-week whistle tour? Whistle stop tour.
In terms of success, that one that I can't remember.
But you can't talk about it because you don't remember it. So I'm hoping there's an incident that you can remember that in your mind was a success.
There were lots that were not terribly successful. I found over and over again, particularly in small political meetings in communities that either they were Republican communities where the Democrats and progressives and so on were just a small group, or in some cases rural areas where everything was small groups. But in those groups of maybe, as I say, 25 or at most 50 people, I often found people kind of blowing by the quirky stuff I presented. For instance, one of the things, there's an appendix at the end of the book, and also early in the book, this chart. And if anybody wants a copy, here they are. But I proposed this, I'm diverting from your question, I proposed this.
That's fine, that's good.
Chakra system whereby to select the cabinet members, the president's cabinet members. And basically what it amounts to is 7 personality profiles, how you pick these people. And I would try to talk about these, and it just blew by people. And nobody ever asked any questions about it or anything. What they would get around to asking, and I was just astounded to this, but that I should take it seriously. Would I be on the ballot in their state, and so on, all these things. And I was very concerned. I didn't want to be a spoiler who would, allow Reagan to have a second term. But so I backed off of all these things. Now, actually, I wish I had gotten on the ballot in at least the states where Reagan would have won anyway. I think the challenge would have been very interesting. The engagement with people. Oh, this is one other section I'd kind of like to read to you, because we met. Go ahead, yeah. We met on the train. We met this couple who I think were deep Christians, and where is it? Here. Here. Yeah. Dorothy and Fred were the first in a long series of fellow passengers over the next 5 weeks on the rails who bolstered my faith about Americans in general and the central message of this campaign. They exemplified what I hoped most middle Americans were like: sensible, open-minded, willing to listen and talk Americans. After the introductions, Dorothy startled me by asking if I'd been reborn. Did she think that would be a necessary qualification for the office of president? But somehow there seemed nothing dogmatic about her question, only curiosity. I thought for a bit how to answer. Since my early encounters with multi-denominational Christianity, I'd grappled mightily with certain ideas shared by most Christian sects. that I could not accept as truth. One was that a person has to be reborn in Christ to be saved from the fires of hell. I couldn't stomach the idea of barbecuing babies in hell because their families had never heard of Jesus. I doubted Jesus could stomach it either. I'd long ago decided Jesus was not a Christian, so neither was I. Still, I was interested in the ongoing controversy between Christians who view the Bible as teaching metaphor and cultural treasure trove versus those literalists who see every word of the Bible as the mistake-free Word of God. Though I love some deeply moving passages in the Bible, there are also some horrific sections, parts that, if one takes them literally, can give believers the idea they're supposed to be oppressors and slavers, vicious in their conquest or blood vengeance against those who believe differently. But Dorothy seemed just the opposite, a person of compassion and deep commitment to social justice for all. In answer to her question, I finally said, "It depends on what being reborn means to you." I grinned, and she grinned back. Okay, Lowell and Fred went to get beer and didn't come back. I knew Lowell was a bit allergic to doctrinal talk. "Do you read the Bible?" Dorothy asked me. "I've read a lot of it," I said. "I'm not a believer in the inerrant Word of God theory." I watched her a bit warily. She seemed to be listening good-naturedly, but also a little warily. So far, I detected no signs I was seriously offending her. I went on. "I'm fascinated by Bible history and how certain passages seem to have different meanings in different translations. Most of it was written down long after the events described, surviving as oral history for generations. Many repeated phrases are memory devices to help in the telling and retelling of very ancient stories. But each generation must have added or changed details to reflect current concerns and ideas. Much of it can be seen as metaphor or poetic truth, not literal truth." I paused, looking for a response. She stared back, apparently waiting for more. I completed my thought. "A lot of the narrative seems to come from the point of view of axis to grind." Was this a bit more of an answer than she wanted? I added, "There's a lot of wisdom in it, but I don't believe the Armageddon Reagan is pushing us toward is mandated by Scripture, and I don't believe Jesus would go along with that either." At that she laughed and said, "I believe Armageddon will come someday, but Reagan does seem to be pushing for it to come much faster than necessary." We laughed together. Anyway, we went on. There is...
Could I ask a question?
Yes.
Susanna?
Yes.
How long, well, you said it was a 5-month whistle-stop tour that you did?
That particular tour was 5 weeks.
5 weeks.
We just were on the train, we stopped.
And
here and there.
how far did you travel from California on this junket?
I think we covered about 30 states and maybe 20 big cities and something like 200 little towns. Most of those were literally whistle stops. The train would stop for 5 minutes. And, but from the office in Venice, we had sent out notices everywhere we knew there were any artists at all, and told the artists about it and asked them to bring people out or bring the press or whatever. So most of the beginning of the trip, almost every single whistle stop, we met somebody. One person sometimes, 2 or 3 sometimes, half a dozen once or twice, So we covered an awful lot. On the East Coast, for some reason, nobody turned out at the whistle stops. It was interesting. But,
and then, so how did that work with the train system? Were you on Amtrak? Did you have your own train that went?
No, we traveled by coach when we were, just going between stops where we would stay overnight, or sometimes we had, sleeping car accommodation. And we mostly you know, campaigned in the dining cars and bars, things like that. Salon, saloon car, whatever it's called.
Yeah. But it was all on the train that you traveled?
On that trip entirely. One other trip, a trip to Oregon and Washington State, was entirely by train. Other trips were partly by automobile and partly by plane sometime. I wanted to avoid planes entirely because one of the things I wanted to push was, you know, that the railroads are more economical and efficient and safer. That is, if the tracks are kept up, which Reagan was quickly losing as fast as he could.
Could you tell us about the rather peculiar thing that happened when you came into Union Station at the end of it?
Oh, yes. At the very end of that 5-week whistle stop tour, and we were exhausted, just absolutely exhausted by that time, coming into LA and expecting we were going to be met by a crowd of friends, you know, and maybe a few other people too, but whatever. We came in as the train pulled up to the dock. There were no people, absolutely no people on the dock, which is very, very unusual. But there were policemen patrolling back and forth. Well,
Danger, artist coming.
Well, we had no, and I think Lowell was at that point carrying some not yet legal substances. And he started turning green when he saw the police. Well, when he saw the police enter our car. And the police came, 3 policemen came in. One, how did this go now? Yeah, between the 3 of them, they questioned everybody in the car, and then they came to us, and at that point, 2 of them escorted us off the train, and the other one stayed with the people. We were taken to the chief officer of, you know, that detail, his office, and it was just an eerie interview, absolutely eerie. But apparently what had happened is somebody had called in a bomb threat to the LA Times, and
Directed at you?
Directed at me, yeah. And Lowell had been jokingly said, you know, we really ought to arrange a bomb threat. And so I was suspicious of Lowell. But no, he hadn't. And he was totally mystified by it. And the resolution is in the book. You don't have to read the book.
All right, fair enough.
Can you explain the line, "The nation is the artwork, we are the artists"? I mean, I think we all understand it, but could you maybe expand on what your idea and philosophy is about that?
Well, yes, thanks. I believe very profoundly that every single kid is born with some kind of little artist in them, and that it's very largely chased out of them by either family or the educational system or whatever. And I think it's a tragedy because I think that kind of curiosity that artists have and the development of, you know, if you really follow your curiosity about anything, absolutely anything, you learn something, including some skills. And some of those skills that you learn are literally survival skills. And I think this nation is a threat because none of us are using our fundamental survival skills, our artist skills. And so my objective in this whole campaign was to just spread the idea that we all could be artists if we just, first of all, recognize that possibility and then set about really honing our skills. And those skills can be anything, you know? But it takes that kind of pursuit of whatever to enlarge the horizon of what's possible, of how to solve the nation's work. And the nation is the artwork. We are the artists, but if we are not aware of that, all we're doing is making messes, which is what's happening. Does that?
So had you won, right? Day one of the White House, what would you have done?
You must have asked yourself this at some point.
Every time I did, I really would get frightened. I'd break out in a sweat. What if? All I can say is that I would try to find the most intelligent, creative people I could to make into my cabinet, and then say, okay, folks, what do we do now? But somehow I think in this country there's this huge fear of creativity because it comes up with unexpected things. There's a fear of the unexpected. It is profound in this country. And yet, we are going to go down the tubes if we don't find some unexpected things.
What do you think about today, Sue? It's been a minute or two since you did this.
It's absolutely remarkable to me that so little has changed. It's a little worse in the sense that there's a larger mass of, what do you call them, non-artists who want to run things. I mean, people, this is my impression of the Tea Party. They're typical of people who think in certain patterns and will not allow themselves to think in other patterns.
That's fascinating. So that's your definition of Tea Party.
Pretty much so.
Were there any groups during this time, were there any like political groups that came out like vehemently against you?
I probably didn't allow myself to become visible enough. I mean, I more, you know, at one point I tried to deal with what did I accomplish. I ended the campaign with a sense of failure. And I think part of that sense of failure was a lack of engagement with people who disagreed with me. Most of the people I was able to talk to were people who could see the wisdom of some of the stuff I was saying. And now, to some extent, I'm hoping this book invites some disagreement.
Regarding your mention of the term non-artist, I was wondering if you would agree with my personal definition of non-artist. Someone who lacks this aesthetic, a sense of appreciation of art because they have something lacking within themselves. That someone who has no sense of aesthetics is somehow missing a sense of perception that artists have. Do you agree with that?
Yes, definitely. I think if we could do a deep investigation of all those people, we'd probably find that most or all of them were probably the art was beaten out of them when they were very young.
Do you think anybody is ever born without a sense of art, or is it something that's trained at?
Well, I think, you know, children are born with this, infants are born with this brain that's just kind of exploding with possibility. And you know, if it's really allowed and encouraged, it takes in a whole lot of stuff very, very fast, you know, first couple of years of life. If it's inhibited or punished or whatever, and there are various ways of punishing, some of which don't hurt the body, but when a small child is really kind of corralled so that it can't learn how to use its own creative imagination, then after a while it comes to think, well, that's the right way.
That's one reason I took my kids out of school and homeschooled them.
I'm sorry?
That's one reason I took my kids out of school and homeschooled them, is because educational system was trying to train to be non-artists.
Right. I've met a lot of teachers who kind of agreed with me and would have liked to change the school system. But it's very hard in the present political atmosphere because creativity is a threat. It's a threat to the status quo. Anybody else?
What would you like to see changed today? What's the biggest threat that you see that needs to have some surface whittled away from, the edge taken off of?
Well, one is very definitely the idea that art is a thrill. Any of the arts are a thrill. You know, that the arts really should be at the center of all curricula. You can learn sciences, mathematics, politics, just about anything through the arts. History, absolutely anything, if you honor the arts. And in fact, one of the things I talk about in here is in 1975, there was a report that came out that tracked the artists in the schools programs that were done all over the country in the 60s and 70s. And almost without fail, the presence of a working artist in a school had a positive effect on school attendance and performance in classes across the board, that many of which had nothing to do with what we think of as art. I mean, essentially the presence of a working artist in the school, and this is not just an art teacher who's learned how to teach certain kinds of things, but a working artist, the presence of a working artist, what it demonstrates to kids is that anything can become the material for art. And so it makes things potentially much more exciting than they are if they're just, you know, things in a textbook that you're supposed to memorize.
Well, you know, it's interesting. I taught for 3 years, and exactly what you're saying. What I noticed was an incredible lack of creativity, or rather curiosity. I mean, a shocking lack of curiosity. It was, if it didn't come to me, then what? You put two things in front of people. You put two things in front of an artist, and they're like, okay, hold on a minute, you know, and all this stuff's happening. And you put two things in front of people whose creativity has been zapped in some way, and they look at two things and wait for you to do something with them. That was the most shocking thing. But on the same token, there's a payment to the arts. We must have the arts. We must appreciate the arts. My child must take violin. But there's a disdain for him becoming an artist. So there's this hypocrisy. And so it doesn't matter what arts program you shove in, you also have to honor it, because you can't be secretly frightened that the kid is going to become a concert violinist at the same breath. And that's the message they pick up. So it's really interesting. I mean, what you're saying is very pertinent.
My father's mother was apparently a very talented pianist, and her teacher wanted to, at that time, what's it called, Juilliard was not yet in existence, and her teacher wanted her to go to Europe to study, and my great-grandparents forbade it. So she was this kind of grumpy diva over life. Never got it.
Well, if there are no more questions, give us a closing statement. You can just.
Okay, can I
read
one little
absolutely,
thing?
yeah. Send us off with a reading.
This is at the end of the conversation with Dorothy, the Christian woman.
The woman that thought the apocalypse was coming, but just not as soon as Reagan wanted it.
Right. Let's see. She told me a story about a Native American who worked for her for a while, and because there were people of his tribe who came to her church, she at one point asked him if he was a Christian, and he stared at her for a long time and then broke out in this huge big grin and then burst into laughter and said, "Be careful of those Christians, they talk behind your back."
Huh.
And and he never came back after that, and she was very sad about that. So after that, I told her this little story. I told her one of my favorite stories, gleaned from a book by a Jesuit missionary who'd worked with Native American tribes across the middle of the continent in the early 20th century. It was published in the 1930s. Among tribes he'd worked with, he'd met the most resistance to his Christianizing efforts from Hopis, though it was a passive, unthreatening resistance. He was intrigued and challenged by them. One day he was talking with a particularly wise and influential Hopi elder. He told the story of Adam and Eve and the serpent and the expulsion from Eden. When he finished, I recalled for Dorothy, he said there was a very long pause while the elder apparently contemplated all the ramifications of that tale. Finally, the elder said, "So that's your origin story. Now let me tell you ours," and proceeded to tell a long story of multiple levels of kivas, each opening into a new world just in time before human problems became overwhelming. At each level, as the human beings climbed out of their messed up lower world for a new chance and a higher one, the Creator expresses disappointment in the failure of his created offspring to exercise their given faculty of curiosity to solve their problems. Dorothy's wonderful laugh burst out. We laughed together. The story seemed to please her as much as it had me. And then I went on. As I remember, the Jesuit was so impressed by the astute wisdom and tranquility of the Hopi elder and his story that he retired from proselytizing activities and became an anthropologist, recording the lives and beliefs of the people he had been trying to convert. And I paused and said, maybe having made curiosity into a sin that has put it outside the reach of Judeo-Christian ethical consciousness, made it so tantalizing that it's led us into this nuclear arms race. We stared at each other. Had I spoken blasphemy in her world? Suddenly we broke again into ripples of laughter over and over until the men returned to tell it was dinner time. Books.
Yeah, so we're going to take, I know that we have the
Krampus Choir.
Yeah, the Krampus Choir is next, but let's just take a 5-minute break. People can come up and buy a book from Sue, and then we're going to shift into the other part of this room. We're going to move into the northern part. So,
I was hoping to be asked a question by the mask over there.
Oh, Krampus? King Krampus, have you a question?
What do you think about...
Oh, then I would ask a question?
I'll just say
You can come and stand with her and ask a question into her ear.
Why did you not have Krampus as your vice presidential candidate? That would have led to obedient children all over the country. I was available. Please stay around. I'm sorry to see there are no tiny tots here. They would never misbehave after our performance.
Oh, thank you.